CIAT. So as some of you will know, we published the CIAT's Principal Designer Register on the 1st of May. So this session is just to share some of the experiences that we have so far in administering the scheme, and also any questions that you might have towards the end of it. So what we will be doing is going through the following key areas of introducing our PD register, and that includes the competency framework that was developed. We then will also be talking, as the presentation goes on, about the competency requirements that everyone would have to meet in order to become a registrant, either for higher risk buildings or non-higher risk buildings. So as part of PAS 8670, there were stipulations set that organizations assessing the competence of either principal designers or principal contractors had to make publicly available registers. So while there's nothing in the legislation saying that you have to be registered either on CIAT's scheme or that of any other professional institute, we decided that it would be in the interest of our members, as well as the interest of prospective clients or members of the public duty holders, to be able to check whether someone has been deemed competent in this sphere. And that's why we have developed the Principal Designer Register, and it is currently only open for chartered architectural technologists. So anyone that's either an associate member with us or affiliate status holder, they would actually have to become chartered initially, and then from there they would be able to make a submission for the PD register. And so the reason why we have decided that we will not accept submissions or applications from anyone that isn't chartered with us is purely because these are sort of separate checkpoints that we have put in place as the Institute. So while the professional assessment route, which is the most common route to become chartered, details an individual's knowledge and experience based on their scope of practice. By going through a professional assessment method, it allows them to, or allows us as the Institute rather, to determine that they are offering services within their technical expertise and professional capabilities. Whereas then now with the building regulations, they are recent, but then the experience of this could be over and above what someone has done to become chartered. So that's why we haven't automatically allowed anyone that's a chartered architectural technologist to become a PD, because there needs to be a separate assessment on very specific skills and experience. So as part of the competency framework that CIAT developed, as I mentioned earlier, we based it off of the requirements from 8670, which is what an assessment body would have to do and provide for those registrants. But then also we have used the definition of what a PD is from PAS 8671, and that's there on the screen there for you. And what some other institutions may have done, and you may have seen as well, is that they are combining the roles of principal designer under the building regulations, which is what we as CIAT have decided to do, whereas others have combined that with the principal designer role under the CDM regulations. And while we acknowledge that both of these roles relate to safety, they relate at different parts of the project. And that's why we are focusing purely on what was outlined in 8671 and 8670. So for competence, which is what our scheme will be assessing chartered architectural technologists against, there are two components to this. So one are the knowledge criteria, so what someone has to know and understand, and then also the performance criteria as to what they need to be able to do. And the way that we will be assessing these, or are assessing these through the principal designer scheme, are that there is a written application that then allows the applicant to write either where they've gained certain knowledge of from, or where they can find that knowledge, but then also accompany a portfolio of evidence that relates very specifically to the four kind of competency areas, which I'll pass over to James to talk to you in more detail.
Okay, so thank you for that, Nora. So in the chat box function, I've put a link to the website where, if you haven't seen it already, you can get access to the Principal Designer Competency Framework. You can look at the candidate guidance notes for application, and you can look at the respective application forms for registration as a PD for HRBs, PD for non-HRBs, and moving from a PD for non-HRBs to HRB registration. So within the framework, there's a set list of criterion, knowledge, experience, as well as performance evidence that you'll need to be able to provide to CIAT and contextualize within your application to facilitate you to be successful for registration. So Unit A is all around behavioural competencies, and there's 4 bullet points which are outlined in A1 to A4, which you can review in due course and consider accordingly. And that is required for all applicants looking for the respective registrations that we offer. Competency B, again, a set list of bullet points of knowledge and performance criteria required. B1 to B3 would be for non-HRB registration, and then B4 and B5 would also be required for registration as a HRB. And again, that looks at legislative and regulatory compliance and frameworks to ensure the design works at the required level. Moreover, moving on to the next slide, you've got competencies C and D. So C is around management of design work compliance. C1 to C8 is for non-HRB registration. And then you also need to address C9 to C11 for HRB registration. And again, that's all about management of plan and design work compliance, monitoring and coordinating designers, and ensuring everything through the design phase is compliant. And then competency D, technical framework for compliance of D1 to D5 for non-HRB registration, as well as D6 onwards for HRB registration. And you need to understand the general principles of building design, construction, and the core criteria for what we're now calling building safety set out in BSI Flex 8670. So again, it might be the fact that you need to go away, look at these criteria, consider what project examples you've got to prove experience, and then provide a concise written narrative to address each of the criteria and back that up where possible with supporting evidence. So within the candidate guidance notes, there is a bit more of a steer on how you could constitute an application and what kind of things we're looking for. But ultimately, you need to show proficiency, competency, and experience as a PD practitioner against the respective criteria. And regarding performance evidence, we have worked with a core group of chartered architectural technologists, which formed the steering group as we went through this process, to try and summarize in an easy to understand manner what type of documentation you could provide to enable you to get registration as a PD. So for non-HRB registration, this is a consolidated, concise list which should give you an idea of project-based experiences you can put forward. So accepting or declining specific works, whether it be clients, other designers, PDs or PCs, engaging competent professionals to supplement or fulfill the competencies lacking in a project delivery team, logging of project work, sign contracts and list of responsibilities for all relevant parties, evidence as part of the project team or junior staff encouraging them to deliver against their responsibilities as necessary. Quite integral to the role is statutory compliance. So again, these are just ideas of types of evidence, fire and structural communication, meeting minutes, email queries, clarifications, engagement with the principal contractor, suggesting refinements or amendments to design and construction process, approvals from statutory authorities around respective stages of the process you're delivering, evidence of project commission, so that's whether that's organisational or individual competence, and ensuring you're aware and all the other duty holders are aware of their responsibilities, challenging designs, early assessment of constraints, regulation for 38 information, and where necessary, involvement with critical analysis of fire risk assessment. Now, this is a list of ideas to give you an understanding of what you could provide in your portfolio to show performance evidence and competence. But again, it's no means a set list of what you could use. there's more examples you might have that you could bring in and justify, then that's perfectly acceptable. So that's the kind of evidence we want for a non-HRB registrant. For a HRB registrant, we are mindful that some of these criteria are quite new to industry, and it may be the fact that a lot of professionals in industry may well have not got to certain points, such as compliance with Gateway 2, compliance with Gateway 3, and the BSR may not be fully up to speed with regards to each of the stages of what needs to be required for individuals to meet those criteria. So again, these are types of evidence you could potentially bring into your application. Internal critical analysis against each gateway point, compliance with the gateway stages 1, 2, and 3, compliance with statutory applications. Again, there are some synergies between HRB and non-HRB, contracts and evidence of appointments, managing scopes of work, involvement in critical analysis of fire risk assessments of external rules, challenging those if necessary, challenging designs, product evaluation and choice, early assessment of constraints, compliance with relevant requirements, change of design through compliance and or calculations as necessary, coordinating other professionals and other disciplines, and challenging competencies of duty holders. So again, these were put together by charter members of CIAT so that we could get a good yardstick and you could get a good yardstick of the types of evidence we require to get qualified and get onto the register. But ultimately, it's your application, it's your experience. You need to address the criteria for whichever registration you want to go for. You need a concise, succinct narrative. And where possible, you need to back all these up with supporting evidence to show that you can deliver at that competent, proficient level as a PD.
So this slide here just reiterates what James just said in terms of there's the written application and we have three different forms. So this will depend on whether or not you are applying for to be an HRB applicant, a non-HRB applicant, or whether, and we have also allowed the opportunity for individuals that might have initially registered to be a PD for non-HRB buildings, but then perhaps either their interest has developed or their experience has developed and they would like to transition from being a PD for HRBs as well. We have taken that into account. So there, like we've mentioned, there are three different application forms available. And then, as James mentioned, you have to develop a narrative addressing the competencies of the framework against the experience that you have to date. So again, that can be like for like experience, or that can be comparable experience in the case of any of the gateways that might not have been completely confirmed yet. And then any applications should be submitted to pdregister@ciat.global. And then there are the different fees, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then for reaccreditation, this will happen after 5 years. So just to remind everyone, if someone submits or applies to be on the HRB register, they will automatically, if they are successful in that assessment and the interview, they will also be listed as a PD for non-HRB projects on our publicly available register as well. So they get dual registration. And then, of course, if someone transitions from non-HRB to HRB, then they would also be a dual registrant on our register. And here are the fees that we are charging. So as I said earlier, the register launched on the 1st of May of this year. So for anyone wishing to apply for an HRB PD, the fee is £350. For non-HRB, it's £200. And then in the instance that someone that originally went on for non-HRB but wants to now progress onto HRB, you would just have to pay the difference, which is £150. And for this current subscription year, which runs until the end of April 2025, we will not actually be charging any subscription fees. And this is purely to determine how much resources running these schemes will take. And then once that is decided, that will be in force from the 1st of May 2025. And then, so that's everything that we have from our side, but now we'd be happy to open up the floor for any questions anyone has about the PD register.
Sorry, no, I've just got one further clarification. So just to be clear, with a non-HRB submission, all it is written application and evidence would lead to registration. However, CIAT reserved the right to invite you to interview to get your non-HRB registration. And for all applicants looking to become a PD for HRBs, you will, upon submitting your written application and your portfolio and that deemed being suitable, you will then be invited to sit a professional review interview. And upon successful attendance of your PRI interview, you would then be elected as a PD for HRB. So that's just a little bit of clarification on the registration process. But after that, yeah, we're happy to open it up to the floor. Should anyone want to raise a hand and have any verbal queries, or you can put some queries in the chat box. Time-wise, for a non-HRB registration or a new submission for HRB, it's about 28 days potentially to get a decision. And moreover, then should you then be looking to come for the interview for HRB registration, you need to give us another 28 days to give you facility to arrange that time frame for your remote interview with your peers to get HRB registration. So Anthony is asking about section B. So I would say, Anthony, you need to look at the bullet points of the competency framework, and where possible, you need to provide a narrative that would demonstrate your knowledge and understanding and or your experience performing that specific function, and thereby that would enable you to demonstrate competency as per that model that Nora presented in one of her slides. So in an ideal world, against each bullet point, we should be looking for some supporting evidence to show your proficiency and competency in that specific output. But as I alluded to, there is some pragmatism from our side around certain outputs, such as Gateway 2, Gateway 3 with a BSR, where very few have actually gone through that process. So it would be a bit of a pragmatic, holistic assessment should there be a certain function that not many are undertaking in industry at this point, but in time you will. I mean, now's a good time to ask any questions if you got them. I mean, there's some familiar names and faces in the room. Well, I can't see your faces, but I recognise the names. Um, so has anyone actually started going through the application and developing their submission and their portfolio? Or is it all so new that everyone's just taking their time to digest it all? So at this point, we've got 10 registered PDs and we've got 6 applications in process. Evidence-wise, evidence to show your proficiency. So as Nora alluded to, you know, the definition of the role has recently been published. So you'd envisage evidence to comply with some of those outputs where possible should be as current as possible to show your proficiency and understanding of the current regulatory regime that we're all practicing within. And Mark, yes, all the documentation can be found on the website. So you just need to download that, look at the forms, look at the framework, look at the guidance notes, and then develop an application. PI queries need to go to practice at ciat.global. It's not something that Nora or I would necessarily deal with. I think there was one other query coming up here. If you've refused work, or if you've not had to refuse work, then you could just mention that, or you can maybe give a statement to say, should a certain scenario come about, this is the process I would take to decline such work. So put it all in writing, you know, get a red receipt, whatever it might be. Just convey the process you feel you would go through to decline any work as necessary. So well, they're flying in now. So there's no subscription this subscription year to be a registered PD, whether it's HRB or non-HRB. CIAT are not charging a subscription. From the 1st of May next year, there will be a subscription to pay annually, but we don't know how much the register is costing us at this point. So we thought it'd be fairer to the members to say, once we know the cost, this is the fee you will need to pay annually to keep your registration. And moreover, every 5 years, there will be a fee for reaccreditation. But again, that's to be determined in due course. Evidence from past projects. Yeah, I mean, it's up to you to provide what you can evidence-wise to support your application for registration. So if you can justify the context, demonstrate the competence and provide the evidence that you feel meets the requirements, then you're more than welcome to put an application in, and then the assessors who are on the respective registers could then make an assessment around your suitability for registration. The 2,000 word limit or the respective word limits on the form are for your complete application, plus or minus 10% in relation to the specific criteria for the respective registrations. Well, where we are with submitting planning and planning and building regulation applications, I haven't seen any change from building control at this point, but there have been potential discussions within industry that it might be something that they're moving towards down the line, that there would be an expectation for those submitting such things for approval would need to demonstrate competence, such as the building control officers needing to demonstrate competence. And Mike, if you're going for HRB, then you don't need to submit a non-HRB application because you would have already met those requirements to get your HRB registration. So HRBs over and above. So that one application would cover the two areas for respective registration. No, PD registration is an optional thing at the moment. So it's not really a direct have a direct effect on your chartered membership. But you will need to be a chartered member to retain your PD registration. So it's only one way. So you can always be a chartered architectural technologist. You don't necessarily have to be a PD on our register. That's optional. But if you want to be a PD on our register, you have to remain a chartered architectural technologist. And if you're not a chartered architectural technologist, you need to go through the professional assessment qualifying process to get your chartership to then consider applying for registration as a PD with us. So it's good to see there's quite a few queries coming through. It is quite new to everybody, and it's an evolving organic process that we're working through as well. But the process is there, the criteria are there, the opportunity is there. Should you determine this is a mechanism that you would want to use and benefit from to demonstrate competence to all whom you engage with in industry. I said specific queries about PI, the whys and the wherefores of the regulations or things you're not quite clear on, please submit those to practice@ciat.global, because that's more of a specific technical query, we would say, that our colleagues would head up more so than Nora and myself. So with regards, if you're registering as a PD, you're demonstrating competence as a PD. So that framework, in my view, outlines the roles, responsibilities and obligations expected to be a principal designer. And if you meet the requirements in the framework, that will show you're competent to fill that role. So I'd say the competency framework should educate you as to roles and responsibilities. Other associated factors related to the regulations and legislation, again, you probably need to speak to practice@ciat.global if you're not quite sure how they might have an effect on you. So for Oliver's query, I said no subscription this year, but you need to pay the application and assessment fee to get on the register whenever you apply. From the 1st of May next year, you will pay an annual subscription for your PD registration on top of your subscription to be a chartered architectural technologist. Then, once you've had registration for 5 years, you would then need to go through the application and assessment process again, albeit at this point, I don't envisage the fees will be at the same level at the time of your initial application. But, you know, we're only 6 weeks into this process, so we can't tell you what the reaccreditation fee would be at that 5 year period for you. But keep a watching brief, and we will just cover our costs in relation to those processes. Adam's query is, I think you might struggle to demonstrate competence, proficiency, and experience to get on the HRB register if you haven't actually undertaken those functions or functions similar. So it might be something that you might need to work towards to develop, should we say, because ultimately you need to show you're competent in those all of those roles and outputs, given the ones that haven't necessarily happened to this point. There's a bit of flexibility there, but it's going to be difficult for you to get registration if you haven't fulfilled the role, if you see what I mean.
I'd also add there to Adam's question that CIAT is only looking at individual competence as opposed to organizational competence as well.
And Ken's point around fees being charged, ultimately there's a cost that comes with running such a register, and we will be keeping the cost as low as we can to cover our costs, but make it viable for CIAT to provide this option to chartered architectural technologists. I won't provide comment on other fees on other registers being charged in industry, but as I said, no subscription will be charged this year by us, and next year it will be a subscription just to cover our costs of administering the register for the benefit of chartered architectural technologies, for the benefit of society, and for the benefit of stakeholders and the client. So most people probably have my email address. You can get hold of Nora through the website. So if you've got specific queries about your individual circumstance and you want clarification, then practice at ciat.global is your first port of call. In my opinion, there's some FAQs on the website, but if there's not any further queries, I'm going to propose to bring this to a close, stop recording, and then invite you to look at the criteria in detail, develop a submission, consider registration, and then hopefully in the near future we can get some of you through and registered as PDs for whichever building typology you choose to go for. But it's there for you should you wish to go for it. But again, as Nora alluded to, it's not a mandatory expectation for you to apply. It's optional should you determine you want to demonstrate competence as a PD through our process.